October 14, 2017. At an open-air music fair in Los Angeles, more than 20,000 synthesizers were being sold. Flashing lights, huge speakers, digital sounds, crowds everywhere. But nobody was looking at the $150 handmade harmonicas sitting quietly on a tiny folding table in the farthest corner of the fair. That's exactly why Ernest Whitfield was ready to pack up and go home. Again, another night eating dinner alone. Another night staring at his wife Evelyn's photograph. Another night falling asleep without speaking to anyone. But he couldn't leave, because at exactly 3:15 p.m., Ozzy Osbourne walked away from the fair's busiest corridor and toward its quietest corner. There were no cameras. There were no journalists. No concert. Just one tired rock legend. And one forgotten craftsman. Earlier that morning, Ozzy had left his Los Angeles home because he couldn't stand the silence anymore. Months after Black Sabbath ended, life felt strange. No schedules, no loud backstage halls, no late-night recording sessions, just quiet mornings, empty rooms, and too much time to think. As Ozzy sat in the back seat beside his driver Tony, he stared silently through the window. "Where are we going?" Tony asked. "Anywhere," Ozzy replied. Then they passed a colorful banner. "Los Angeles Music and Craft Fair." Ozzy rolled down the window. Music echoed through the streets. People laughed. Drums pounded somewhere nearby. Normally, he avoided crowds, but that day felt different. "Pull over," he said quietly, wearing faded jeans, an old dark sweater, oversized sunglasses, and a black baseball cap. Ozzy stepped into the fair almost unnoticed. Everywhere he looked glowed with neon signs and expensive digital equipment. Young vendors demonstrated futuristic instruments while visitors danced wearing headphones. Everything looked modern, but somehow, none of it felt alive. Then near the very back of the fair, Ozzy noticed something different. A tiny stand hidden in the corner. No screens, no speakers, no lights. Just 17 handmade harmonicas resting carefully on dark burgundy velvet. Behind the table sat an elderly man with trembling hands and tired eyes. His name was Ernest Whitfield. For 52 years, he had made harmonicas by hand, and not one person had stopped all day. Ozzy slowly walked toward the table. Ernest looked up. "Welcome," he said softly. "Interested in harmonicas?" Ozzy picked one up carefully. The polished wood felt warm in his hands. Ernest smiled weakly. 52 years, he said. Ozzy Osbourne slowly turned the harmonica in his hands. The wood felt smooth, warm, almost alive. "This one's walnut," Ernest explained. "Took me nearly 3 weeks." Ozzy studied the tiny carvings wrapping around the sides. "You make all these yourself?" Ernest nodded proudly. "Every single one." Beside the harmonicas sat an old framed photograph, a smiling woman with silver hair. "My wife Evelyn," Ernest said quietly. "She used to polish every harmonica before I sold it." Ozzy's expression softened. "How long were you together?" 48 years. The crowds continued walking past them. Nobody stopped, but Ozzy stayed seated. For the next several minutes, Ernest explained how he started building harmonicas after military service in the 1960 seconds. At first, they sounded terrible, but year after year, he improved. Eventually, musicians started ordering them, not because they were flashy, because they sounded honest, warm, rough, human. Ozzy listened carefully, not like a celebrity, like a musician. Then Ernest admitted something quietly. "These might be the last ones I ever make." Ozzy frowned. "Why?" Ernest looked around the fair. "Nobody wants things made slowly anymore." The sentence hit Ozzy harder than expected, because deep down, he understood exactly what the old man meant. Ozzy remained beside the stand much longer than he planned. The noise of the fair slowly faded behind him. For the first time in months, he felt calm. Ernest carefully lifted another harmonica from beneath the table. This one looked different. Dark maple wood, silver edges, tiny hand-carved roses along the sides. "My best one," Ernest said. "I was saving it." Ozzy held it carefully. "What makes it special?" Ernest smiled faintly. "It remembers breath." Ozzy laughed softly. "That sounds insane." "Maybe," Ernest replied. "But instruments carry pieces of people." Ozzy suddenly became quiet, because after 50 years around music, he believed that too. Ernest then explained that he made the maple harmonica after Evelyn died. Every rose carved into the wood represented a year of their marriage. Ozzy stared silently at the instrument. He could see tiny imperfections in the carving, but somehow, those imperfections made it beautiful. Around them, loud digital music blasted through the fair. But beside the tiny harmonica stand, everything suddenly felt peaceful. Ernest hesitated before speaking. "Want to try it?" Ozzy blinked. "I haven't played harmonica in years." "Then maybe today's the day." Ozzy slowly lifted the instrument. Around them, the fair remained loud and chaotic. Nobody paid attention at first. Then Ozzy played a single note, low, raw, haunting. The sound cut through the noise like smoke. Ernest froze. Ozzy played another note, then another. Soon a slow blues melody drifted through the corner of the fair. People began turning around, one by one. Visitors slowed their steps. A young guitarist stopped speaking mid-conversation. Someone whispered, "Wait, is that Ozzy Osbourne?" Within minutes, dozens of people surrounded the tiny stand. Phones appeared, but Ozzy didn't notice. He kept playing, and Ernest sat completely still beside him, tears slowly forming in his eyes, because for the first time in years, people were finally listening. The crowd doubled within minutes, then tripled. People who ignored the harmonicas earlier suddenly rushed toward the stand. How much are they? Did he really make these himself? Ernest looked overwhelmed. His trembling hands struggled to answer everyone. Ozzy finally lowered the harmonica. "These are real instruments," he told the crowd, "made by a real artist." The crowd applauded loudly. One young musician bought the harmonicas immediately. Then another customer bought one. Then another. Within 20 minutes, every harmonica on the table was sold. Every single one. Ernest stared silently at the empty spaces on the velvet cloth, like he couldn't believe it was real. Ozzy quietly smiled, then pointed toward the maple harmonica. "How much for that one?" Ernest shook his head. "That one isn't for sale." Ozzy smiled. "Good." By evening, videos from the fair had already spread across social media. Ozzy Osbourne discovers forgotten harmonica maker. Rock legend helps elderly craftsmen sell out in minutes. Millions watched. But what touched people most wasn't celebrity. It was kindness. The next morning, Ernest woke up to non-stop phone calls. Music stores wanted orders. Collectors wanted interviews. Young musicians wanted lessons. For the first time in years, the old workshop phone would not stop ringing. Meanwhile, Ozzy sat quietly at home watching clips online. Sharon entered the room smiling. "You disappeared for one afternoon and broke the internet again." Ozzy laughed softly. But then his expression changed. "It wasn't about me." That night, Ozzy carefully placed Ernest's harmonica beside his favorite studio equipment. Not as decoration, as a reminder. Some things still mattered. Over the next several months, Ozzy continued visiting Ernest quietly. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late in the afternoon. No cameras, no publicity, just conversations. Ernest taught Ozzy how different woods change sound. Walnut sounded warmer. Maple sounded sharper. Oak carried deeper tones. Ozzy listened like a student, not as a rock legend, but as someone rediscovering why he loved music in the first place. Slowly, the silence that had followed him for years began to fade, and in its place, something new appeared: peace. One afternoon, while sitting beside the workshop window, Ernest looked at Ozzy and spoke quietly. "You know what I don't understand?" Ozzy looked up. "What?" "Why people suddenly care now." Ozzy thought for a moment. Then he answered softly, "Because real things don't shout. They wait to be found." Ernest smiled for the first time in a long while. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of woodcarving filled the room. Ernest Whitfield passed away peacefully in his sleep. On his workbench sat an unfinished harmonica, and beside it, a handwritten note. To Ozzy, "Thank you for letting people hear me." When Ozzy received the news, he did not speak for a long time. He simply sat in silence. Then he drove alone to Ernest's workshop. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Tools arranged neatly, wood shavings on the table, half-finished harmonicas waiting for hands that would never return. Ozzy picked up the unfinished instrument. His fingers trembled slightly, because for the first time, the workshop felt empty in a way music could not fill. Days later, a small memorial was held. Musicians, friends, and strangers gathered. But no stage mattered more than what happened next. Ozzy stepped forward holding the maple harmonica. No words, no introduction, just breath. Then he played. Soft, slow, honest. The sound filled the room like memory itself. Some people closed their eyes. Others cried quietly, because it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like goodbye. When the final note faded, Ozzy placed the harmonica beside Ernest's photograph, then whispered, "The world heard you." And for a long moment, nobody moved.